So the mycelium is basically cloned. And so what I do is I take a portion of this, whether it's from this or from the actual mushroom that has characteristics I like, or I can even take spores and put them on a petri dish and hatch them out and get a new variation. But I like this one, it's proven winner. This one's a commercial farm variety, so it has higher yields. This is Stropharia. We call it wine cap, is a common name.
Wine cap.
But King Stropharia, there's a lot of different names. Mushroom farmers call it SRA, and we list it as SRA/wine cap, so SRA. And that's the Latin Stropharia rusa annulata, which is, of course, critical in identification later when it comes to eating it.
Right.
So what we do is take a small portion of it and we essentially clone it. We put it on a petri dish with some antibacterial components, and it colonizes the agar or the agar in the plate, and then we can take wedges off of that. And once we have it cleaned up, we can begin to progress it on from those little wedges onto bags of grain, and then you use those grains to inoculate this that we see behind us. So it's fairly complex, but once you get it going, these are what we call a production inventory lab.
What are these?
These are the sawdust blocks. So this is sawdust. Okay. It comes to us locally. Of course, we try to buy everything we can. I generally get it from Vulcan, Michigan at that mill, but right now I'm having to get it from Marta, Wisconsin, because the Vulcan mill was out for a while. And then it's Wheat Brand, which also comes from Wisconsin. The bags are made in Texas, so it's an American-made product from the get-go. But it's just a mixture of sawdust and basic Wheat Brand, and then the mycelium colonizes it. Think of this as an artificial log. This is the bark, and that's the wood substrate inside. Right? And that's literally what we're doing. Only this mushroom doesn't like to grow on a tree. It likes to grow on mulch and materials on the ground. So if you can imagine a red woodpecker coming in, tearing a tree up, and that mulch that kind of appears at the bottom, that's its natural place in our environment. It occurs across the entire northern hemisphere of the world in kind of this fashion. Or if you have a lot of organic debris, like a compost pile going, it tends to want to appear there. It's its thing. It likes to break down all this material rapidly and fruit prolifically. And it happens often, which means it's advantageous for us. And the byproduct that it leaves behind is beautiful soil. Which is extremely advantageous in a world where it takes a forest 100 years to make an inch of soil. The best regenerative ag practices, 35 years to make 1 inch of soil. We make 3 inches in a couple of years.
Wow.
This is like taking a whole tree and mulching it down. That's what we're essentially doing with mushroom food plot. And whether we're coming in with a forestry mulcher and hitting the area or bringing in sawdust, right? Instead of it, as it decomposing, just happening willy-nilly and sucking the nitrogen out of the landscape to make that decomposition happen, when we introduce a saprotroph in a sufficient amount, what actually happens is the reverse. It begins immediately shuttling nutrients into the landscape to fortify the browse around it. And this is proven through a Sarah grant that it actually adds browse value and makes additional larger yields as a result of its cultivation. So it's a great intercropping system for things like an orchard grower or a market farmer, which is how I first began to know this mushroom, a decade ago and some change.
And what is your website?
Myco, M-Y-C-O, habitat.com. And I do basic habitat work and consultations as well.
On your phone message you had...
mycohabitat@gmail?
No, you had a different...
Oh, Shiitake Creek. That's my... our farm is called Shiitake Creek. That's the mushroom farm. And we were at a previous site in Aurora, just across the river, on the river. And so when I received that job offer, we were going to close the farm, but I had a large inventory left over. I sold off some, and I kept some. And the idea was that my children would carry on with Shiitake Creek at the farmer's market here locally, instead of us doing Marquette and Green Bay, where we've been for years, and driving hundreds of miles a week, and 1,000 miles a week, really, but and all those hours, late nights, early mornings, dodging moose, and it just seemed to be a better way forward. There had to be, So that's kind of what happened there, and it's a bit of a bungle, but it's all out there for people to disseminate that it had happened,
Okay, I'm gonna grab my camera.
While they were eating, and these crumbled pieces and the stems that were missing the caps down inside this stump, and all the other anomalies that led me down this, where, I mean, I have a hit list of their favorite things as I see it, as a forager and as a mushroom farmer. There seem to be selective, and it's also based on the hierarchy of the herd too. That it seems like the older members, in my viewing experience, and I'm not saying this is fact, but it seems like the older members of the herd seem to get more of the prized treasure, or the more, you know, dominant members of the herd, depending on if it's bachelor group, doe group, whatever it may be, or if we're talking during the hunting season where things are way different. But it seems like they seem to get more of the treasure, and I speculate that's because they have worn down teeth and they're not able to enjoy some of those firmer mass crops as much, and so they need the nutrition more. And I believe that the herd
Maybe.
you know, may be responding to that.
But I've seen,
But also see little deer eat them a lot.
yeah, I've seen all
Yeah.
age classes,
Yeah.
both sexes.
So,
Eating them. I'm sure
I guess-
fawns pick it up from their mothers.
Yeah, well, I undoubtedly learned behavior,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, so it seems like maybe it's because I'm looking for the edible mushrooms and the ones that are more palatable to humans, but I would say that the ones that are more palatable to us seem to be more desirable to them.
Very
And
likely, but I've seen them eating red
Yeah.
ones
Yeah.
that I would not touch.
So the red ones with the white dots
Yeah.
on them, yep, the amanitas, those seem to be a favorite. And if bears are noted to have eaten these and lay around groaning,
Right.
enjoying the experience, so to speak.
Yeah.
And of course, this is part of the Scandinavian culture and the Saturnalia, you know, festival of lights. That's, you know, the reindeer and Christmas, so to speak, and all that kind of comes together. But that mushroom, and they would put it up in the boughs of a spruce tree to dry, and then make a tea or feed it to the reindeers and collect it, depending on which the interpretation of the story. But yeah, the deer, you know, seem to eat it, and they seem to love it with no adverse effects, right? And then simultaneously, you know, this mushroom over here that's deadly, let's say the Amanita phalloides or the destroying angels, eat it, you know. And then you see, you know, this mushroom over here, like a false morel this spring, you know. I've never seen them eat a false morel. I put a bunch of cameras on those false morels. And there are some people that say that they've seen deer eat morels and some that haven't. And so, and of course, the morel being America's favorite mushroom, kind of after that cracking. But at some point, basically, I just say, if there's a lot of mushrooms in one spot, that's a good spot to cue in on as a hunter. The hyper accumulation, or if there's not very many in the landscape, but if you get down near a water source, and there are some, that they're after them. If they're in the landscape, that's one of their favorite foods.
Right.
And
Now,
then,
have you done any hunting over your mushroom food?
no, I wasn't allowed to hunt at the previous farm. And it's kind of a laughable thing, like did my subconscious create this entire business just to kill a deer eating a mushroom? But the reality is that there I was allowed to take does, which I could do anywhere from any time. I never had to leave my porch to do that,
Right.
you know, on a farm. But I wasn't allowed to shoot bucks. And that's where a lot of us have our skin in the game. Don't get me wrong, I'm a meat hunter. I love to eat venison. My family is raised on venison. But at the same time, you know, I like big racks, and I cannot lie.
Well, and that's where the appeal is going to be to the average hunter.
Oh, of course, yeah.
You know.
It's not going to be necessarily about freezer filling. So no, I haven't. I had met with Orion Blinds. They're made here in town yesterday, and approached them about a sponsorship, hopefully to help me secure it. But I have some tree stands over some at this new site, and those at the new site are just starting to come online now. And generally, in the first year and a half, 2 years that they're there, they're the most productive.
Right.
So the window ahead of me is extremely promising from my point of view.
Right. For this fall.
For this fall, but they're all tree stands, and I'm exposed, and hopefully a closed blind will allow me to document, and if I select, to choose a harvest opportunity. If you're a habitat manager and you go apply wood chips to your food plot, it's going to suck all the nitrogen out of everything. It's all going to be yellow, and nothing green's going to happen unless you put a ton of fertilizer into it. These aren't yellow. That ain't turning yellow either. Why? Because this mushroom is different. It's a saprotroph. Do you know the difference between the basic types of mushrooms? So ectomycorrhizal or mycorrhizal. Everyone seems to know that one. That's the mushrooms that happen in relationship with the tree. right? Morels and apple trees or elms would be the easiest example of this that we know. That's good relationship. They benefit each other, you know. Okay, a bad relationship would be like the honey mushroom, which kills trees and girdles them and then eats them, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be parasitic. Well, that's also saprotrophic, meaning once it's dead and down, it eats them. This mushroom doesn't kill, it just eats what falls. So all these leaves turn into food, you know, sawdust turns into food. And once it colonizes the materials, it links up with the native soil fungi and begins shuttling nutrients in cooperation for the sugars of the plants around it. And so it's a team player. It's like drafting the best running back in the league, but not only is he the best running back in the league, the guy is a heck of a fella, and all the guys around him want to play better because he's such a good guy. That's what we're basically doing, is this mushroom behaves in that characteristic fashion.
Right.
You know? So
Now, what happened to this ironwood limb?
that ironwood limb,
Did you break
one
it?
of them I broke down, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The other ones, they were smacking my buddy and I in the face while I was doing this. So it started with me wrapping that one back around too far, unfortunately, and I left it. But when I do this, you know, similar to the ones we saw when we come in, this is a licking branch. They love ironwoods, man. They rub and they lick on ironwoods like crazy. So I'm creating a shot opportunity from that deer stand right there and those conifers. There's one maple tree in there, and then they're surrounded by all those firs. And I have a tree stand with a shooting lane right to this spot.
Okay.
And so what I'm trying to create is, inevitably a scrape's going to open here around these. I'm giving them a chance in some good spot to open up a scrape. Same thing with down there. I'm going to put one of the shooting houses from Orion down that way. And so that spot that they already opened up the scrape, there's a few branches that are down. I'm trying to dare them into, you know, put a scrape here of your own.
Right.
And so if I get them to 2 scrapes in a line in particular, they're going to go somewhere within 50 yards of those where they can smell them. They don't necessarily visit them,
Right.
but if they get within 50 yards of those 2 scrapes, then I feel like I have a pretty good chance of the harvest. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is put 2 scrapes within 50 yards together and then have 2 blind locations based on winds to
Right.
and this is just a easy habitat trick. This is basically hinge cutting on a smaller scale. It's side cover. 2, it's frustration material. You know, those young bucks, they get all revved up, they come in here and they just tear everything up.
Right.
Well, that creates noise. That means that the next deer is going to hear it and want to come in here and do it too. That creates an opportunity. And then also the scent aspect. Now every member of this herd, from the little fawn to the older bucks, can get in here and, you know, set up the licking branch.
Right.
And in a year, there'll be almost nothing left on this except for what they can just reach in this dangly stick. Come in here and cut a few pieces off of and let it dangle. That's one of their favorite toys to play with. That's why we create mock scrapes and ropes, right?
Exactly.
So what I'm trying to do is basically imitate a mock scrape with natural materials in a way that they already want. Why would I go get a piece of grapevine and all that and tie it up, or a maple branch? I played with all that stuff. It might work in some guys' spots, but it doesn't really work well up here. They like ironwood up here a lot though. And if you can get an ironwood and bend a few branches down like this, it seems, and you see the next one behind us has a little bit too. It seems like they have a tough time walking past this without having like a challenge. It's kind of like you never see the machine where you punch it and tells you how strong you are or whatever.
No.
All right, well, some taverns and maybe a county fair might have one. And I've seen a whole bunch of younger fellas and, you know, a bunch of their buddies or whatever, you know, who's the strongest? I kind of think that that's kind of what I'm creating here, is that punching machine to see who's got the strongest punch or whatever it may be. As a minimum, it's a play toy for them, you know. So if it's something that they interact with and it didn't cost me anything, then I'm all about giving it a whirl. And this just made sense in my messy little brain. And so far, the other ones that I've made have worked. And so I just made this one most recently. And once again, it just brings some stuff down in their eye level. It helps. They like to come in on this 40 line. And you know how they are, especially those older deer, they kind of want to sneak in on you. If they can find one little piece of cover, they'll hide.
Right.
And so it gives one little piece of cover as a focal point on the edge of this, you know, for now, that I didn't have to use a chainsaw and drop any trees with.
Right.
So that's the thought on that one. There's another one behind us here. There's on the edge there, you can see it. Yep. And then I'll go all the way around. All these brown spots you see will be filled in.
But most of the time, they still run from people. But it's just a matter of spending as much time as possible with them.
Sure.
And then they realize you're not a threat, you're not going to bother them. They get used to your presence.
And I'm all ears regarding everything that you hear and see in that regard. Because like I said earlier, a 1-year-old deer knows more about being a deer than the average human on
Exactly.
Earth.
Before I started walking with them, I had no clue that they ate so many mushrooms. And most people don't, you know?
You know what's trick? If you hold your hat up like this, then gnats will go to your hat instead of your face.
No, I didn't know that.
I learned that when I was cleaning up Hurricane Katrina. I was in on day 2 with the storm effort, search and rescue. And the bugs were so bad you couldn't breathe without you. So anyway, yeah, I learned this too.
Head net is better.
Yeah, way better. Your arms don't get as tired. But if you stop and stand still, if you hold the hat up, they'll go to that.
That's interesting.
So you just eat everything at this point. You know, mushroom wise, it's pretty much, you know, as far as you can tell. Is it? Are they going straight to that food item as they come off the bedding, or are they kind of just going along the way? And if there's a mushroom along the way, we're going to eat some bites of it? Or?
Once the conditions are right, after rain, a number of days after rain, when the mushrooms
like 3
start,
days to 5 days, yep.
And they eat a lot of them.
When they're small,
well, you would not see them. They smell them.
Yep, they weed them out.
They
I got
move.
video of
They
this.
move leaves or logs to eat them before they're even above the ground.
Yeah.
And they know when they're available.
Mm-hmm. They know when they're at their prime.
And
when
then,
they're, you know,
right.
old versus, yeah.
And then when they're available, they search them out, you know.
Okay. So one of my hypotheses is they lay up during rainstorms, and then the flurry of activity later, you know, is that immediately following the rainstorm, the surrounding vegetation is more lush and wet. But within 3 days or so, it's beginning to diminish. But at the same time, the mushrooms are coming on strong from that, and they kind of switch off of that lush, wet veg, immediately following the rain right into mushrooms. It's been one of my personal observations, as far as I could tell from living on a farm with mushrooms.
Right.
So when they come off the bed, you know, they bed 4 or 5 times a day, depending. You know, they're going right to the mushrooms first, is what you're seeing.
Well,
or
in the area
closest food source period, I suppose.
Right. There's acorns, oaks and acorns also in this habitat. So they'll forage on acorns and mushrooms
side by side
as they go.
Yeah.
You know, they'll eat both.
Yeah. And the research and the science says that the 2 food sources support each other. And so it makes all the sense in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah, the water content of mushrooms greatly adds to eating acorns in your diet, when acorns take a lot of water to digest. And then the proteins complement each other. They fill in gaps. So does the phosphorus. And that ergothioneine, once again, helps, you know, those other food sources be more digestible. So makes all the sense in the world.
There was one log that had a tremendous amount of chicken of the woods. And I got photos of a couple different bucks eating that when their antlers were still developing.
Yeah, during the velvet stage. That caught a lot of attention from a few of my friends too. Said I would have never thought they would have eaten chicken. And I found chicken in the woods that had been preyed upon, but I had no definitive proof that it was the deer. So
I photographed them.
You wonder, yeah, exactly. Thank God you did. You wonder, did another forager beat me to it? Did the deer get here first? You know, and then you start looking and you can see the individual teeth marks, you know.
Right.
Well,
I saw signs of them having fed on it prior to actually photographing it immediate, but it just confirmed.
Yeah.
Do you eat chicken in the woods?
I'm not a big mushroom eater.
You might like that.
I know.
Chicken.
There was 2 women who found it
They took it?
and took it.
Yeah.
And I was there when they
Quit
came.
stealing the deer food.
It was a rainy day, and I didn't expect to see anybody else in the woods. And then I see these 2 people. I didn't know if they were men or women walking in the woods. And all of a sudden, one of them saw the orange chicken, the huge growth, and she starts hooping and hollering and running
Yeah, I'm sure.
toward it. And I've got deer I'm photographing around me. Well, it scared the shit out of the
Yeah,
deer.
I'm sure they took off. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what the hell is she hollering about? And I'd been seeing this for weeks. I knew it was there. I knew it was no big deal to me. But I watched them harvest it. They took most of it.
Yeah. It's par for the course.
Yeah.
And so the deer have a tendency to like this one because of the nutty flavor. I mean, it's obscenely nutty, like a cashew that's been freshly roasted.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, I put this one out last night as I left, and I noticed it's already got a few bumps off of it. So I wonder if it's just my human scent or what happened there. And there's a camera right here, so, you know, the good times on it. But long story short, this one just an experiment. Can it be this simple? Can we just unwrap a bag and drop it down here and wait?
So
Probably not. But.
did you put something on the rock?
So this isn't a rock. This is that sawdust inside the bag.
It's the sawdust.
This is a different mixture than you saw us using earlier
Okay.
for the spawn. This one's more rich and has more nutrients in it.
Okay.
So it costs more to make, but this is what we call bag culture. Only in this scenario, I remove the bag and I'm fruiting the mushroom right on it. And so my hypothesis is, you know, simple. Can it be that easy? Can we grow them in the bag, open the bag, and walk away? Can I
So
put
were
this in front of my deer
mycelium
blind?
already in the bag?
The mycelium is already grown in here, and this mushroom is the mycelium and the mushroom of the fruiting body are the same, you know, creature, and it was already growing inside the bag. I removed the bag so that it can continue to grow, and place it here in front of the deer to see what happens next. And then I also have a very large plot of it right here behind us, and some other experiments. I know that they like this mushroom.
So you just put this here yesterday?
Yeah, last night.
Last night?
Yeah.
And there was that fast a growth?
No, it was already coming out.
Oh,
it was already growing.
It was already growing?
Yeah, so it was maybe half this size last night,
Okay.
but because I exposed it, it's growing more rapidly. So for
Right.
the next 2 or 3 days, it's going to be growing.
So what is this? These spots on here?
That's called ornamentation or scales on these, and so pick one off. This whole thing is edible. The stem is just as delicious as the top, which is, you know, for the deer.
humans.
Yeah, for humans. But for the deer too, I've seen them eat this one all the way down to the tree versus leave the stem like others. So I feel like it constitutes more food in that regard. So you see the cobwebby veil there, right? And this is a foliota. Remember, we had native ones that look like this too, that have kind of spikes on top. The native would be Foliota sclerosa. I can send you pictures. This one's from Southeast Asia. It's called Foliota adiposa. I think they may have changed the Latin recently. It's always in flux. But anyway, so commonly we call this the chestnut mushroom because it's obscenely nutty. It's like fresh roasted chestnuts or cashews. And they're absolutely delicious and palatable to humans, which seems to be par for the course. The more palatable it is for us, the more palatable it is for them. So last night, whenever I drove out of here, I popped open a bag that had a little bit of this growing on it, and it'll double every 24 hours for the first day or two, and left it here. And there's a camera back behind us. There's another one. I'm just gonna drop this. Sitting half buried here, and then there's that plot is made of this mushroom too. And so generally this is not cultivated in a plot style at all. And so
So it normally grows externally on wood.
it will grow on wood like these back behind us. This is called a totem, where you take pieces of log and cut it into what we call cookies and reassemble it. You use the spawn or the mycelium as glue in that scenario, and then incubate it, and it produces mushrooms. So it grows very well in that scenario, and it grows good in the drill and fill log scenario as well, and in this indoor bag culture. The problem with growing mushrooms for commercial market that are highly desirable outdoors in these plots is that they're oftentimes going to be interfacing with bugs and other wildlife, right? So it's counterproductive to your efforts to place them unprotected in the landscape, as you can see.
For human consumption.
For human consumption, plus the E. coli risk and all the other, factors.
Right.
With this, I'm literally doing it to see if they'll eat it, or if they choose to eat it versus that, or right here we have a side-by-side comparison. What I believe to be their favorite cultivatable mushroom, or most advantageous one, and another one, right there too. Basically what I consider the top three, side by side, just to
Right.
see if there is, as strong of a draw or less of a draw. And of
Right.
course, the sampling size is smaller here versus there and there,
Right.
but that kind of skews things. But long story short, citizen scientists, I want to know these questions. I want to see for
Right.
myself.